Blood soaked through the wagon floor as Alazan screamed into the howling wind. Her hands clawed at the rough wooden boards beneath her, fingernails splitting as another wave of agony tore through her body. The baby was coming too early, too fast, and something was terribly wrong. Jacob knelt beside her, his face white as snow, watching helplessly as his wife's life poured out onto the dirty blankets. The storm outside raged like a living beast, shaking their covered wagon with such violence that the canvas walls snapped like whips. But nothing was louder than Alazan's cries echoing through the Colorado mountains. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. 3 hours earlier, they had been laughing. Jacob had been telling Alazan stories about the farm they would build in Oregon, how their child would run through fields of golden wheat. Now those dreams felt like cruel jokes as he pressed his trembling hands against her swollen belly, feeling their baby fighting to enter a world that might kill them both. The October blizzard had trapped them in this narrow canyon, miles from any town, any doctor, any hope. Alazan's eyes rolled back as another contraction seized her. This one was different, stronger, more violent. Jacob watched in horror as bright red blood began flowing faster than before, staining her pale blue dress a deep crimson. She had been in labor since dawn, but her body was giving up. The baby was breech, twisted wrong, and every push brought more bleeding. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I can't feel my legs." Panic shot through him like lightning. He had delivered calves on his father's farm, helped birth foals in the stable, but this was different. This was his wife, his child, his whole world bleeding away in a wagon lost in the wilderness. He pressed his ear to her chest and heard her heartbeat growing weaker, more distant, like thunder rolling away into the mountains. The temperature inside the wagon dropped with each gust of wind that found its way through the canvas. Jacob's breath came out in white puffs as he wrapped more blankets around Alazan's shivering body. But the blankets couldn't stop the bleeding. Nothing could. He had tried everything he knew, pressing cloths against her, elevating her legs, whispering prayers he had learned as a child. Outside, the storm seemed to mock their suffering. Wind howled through the pine trees like wolves, and snow fell so thick it turned day into night. They had been traveling for 6 weeks from their home in Missouri, following the promise of free land and fresh starts. Now Jacob wondered if they would ever see another sunrise. Alazan's grip on his hand grew weaker. Her breathing became shallow and irregular. Jacob could see the color draining from her face, leaving her skin the same gray-white as the storm clouds above. Their baby kicked frantically inside her, as if sensing the danger, fighting to be born into a world that was taking its mother away. Then, through the chaos of wind and fear, Jacob heard something that made his blood freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots crunching through snow, moving toward their wagon with purpose. Someone was out there in the blizzard. Someone was coming. The footsteps stopped right outside their wagon. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs as he reached for the rifle leaning against the wagon wall. Out here in the wilderness, strangers meant danger. Bandits, claim jumpers, men who would kill for a horse or a handful of coins. His hands shook as he cocked the weapon, trying not to make a sound. Alazan moaned softly, lost in her own world of pain, unaware that death might be approaching from 2 directions. "Hello" in the wagon. The voice was deep, rough like gravel, but strangely calm. "I heard screaming. Someone needs help." Jacob pressed his back against the wagon side, rifle ready. "Stay back. We don't want any trouble." A low chuckle came through the canvas. "Son, if I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead. That woman in there is bleeding to death. I can smell it from here." The words hit Jacob like a punch to the stomach. This stranger could smell Alazan's blood through the storm, through the canvas walls. What kind of man possessed senses that sharp? Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger, but Alazan's weak cry made him hesitate. She was fading fast. Whatever this stranger wanted, it couldn't be worse than watching his wife die. Step where I can see you, Jacob called out. Hands visible. The canvas flap pulled back, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The man standing in the swirling snow looked like something from a fever dream. Tall as a pine tree, with wild black hair hanging past his shoulders and a beard that reached his chest. His clothes were a mix of animal skins and rough wool, all weathered and patched. But his eyes were what made Jacob's blood run cold. They were the color of winter's sky, pale blue and piercing, like they could see straight through a man's soul. Name's Ezekiel, the stranger said, pushing snow off his massive shoulders. Been living in these mountains 15 years. Never seen a storm this bad hit so early in the season. His gaze moved to Alazn, and his expression changed. The hardness melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like sorrow. How long has she been bleeding? Jacob lowered his rifle slightly. 3 hours. Maybe more. The baby's coming wrong. I don't know what to do. Ezekiel stepped closer, and Jacob could see scars crisscrossing the man's hands and forearms. Old wounds from knife fights or animal claws. This was a man who had survived things that would kill ordinary people. You got clean water? Clean cloths? Anything strong to drink? Some whiskey? Not much else. Jacob's voice cracked. Is she going to die? For a long moment, Ezekiel didn't answer. He knelt beside Alazn, his huge hands surprisingly gentle as he felt her forehead, checked her pulse at her wrist and neck. His face grew darker with each passing second. When he finally looked up at Jacob, his eyes held a weight that spoke of too much loss, too much death witnessed in these lonely mountains. She's lost a lot of blood. The baby's positioned wrong, cutting off circulation. If we don't act fast, you'll lose them both. He paused, studying Jacob's face. But there's something I can try. Something my grandmother taught me before she passed. Cherokee medicine. Old knowledge that most white folks don't believe in. Jacob stared at this wild mountain man, trying to process what he was hearing. Cherokee medicine? His father had always said Indians were savages, but right now, Alazn's labored breathing was the only sound that mattered. What kind of medicine? Ezekiel's jaw tightened. The dangerous kind. The kind that either saves her or kills her faster. But son, looking at her now, she doesn't have long either way. The bleeding won't stop on its own. That baby's going to tear her apart from the inside if we don't get it turned around. Another scream tore from Alazn's throat, weaker than before. Her body convulsed, and more blood soaked through the blankets. Jacob watched his wife's face grow paler, watched her grip on consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers. The decision made itself. Do it, he whispered. Whatever you have to do. Just save her. Ezekiel nodded grimly and began rolling up his sleeves. Then you better start praying, boy, because we're about to wake up spirits that have been sleeping in these mountains for a very long time. Ezekiel's hands moved with practiced speed, gathering supplies from corners of the wagon. Jacob hadn't even noticed him searching. The mountain man seemed to fill the small space completely, his presence both comforting and terrifying. As he worked, he began to speak in a voice so low it almost blended with the wind outside. My grandmother was called White Dove, prettiest Cherokee woman in the whole Tennessee territory, so the stories go. But beauty wasn't what made her special. Ezekiel's fingers found Alazn's wrist, checking her pulse again. His face grew grim. She could call babies into this world when everyone else had given up hope. Could stop bleeding that would kill a grown man. Could speak to the spirits that guard the doorway between life and death. Jacob watched in fascination and fear as Ezekiel pulled a small leather pouch from inside his coat. The pouch looked ancient, worn smooth by countless hands, and it seemed to pulse with its own energy in the dim wagon light. She taught you all that. She tried to. Ezekiel's voice carried a pain so deep it made Jacob's chest ache. Took me up into the mountains when I was just 7 years old. Showed me which plants could heal, which ones could kill. Taught me to read the signs in a woman's body when birth goes wrong. Said the knowledge was too important to die with her. Alazn's breathing grew more shallow. Her skin had taken on a waxy quality that made Jacob's stomach turn. He could see death creeping closer with each labored heartbeat. Why are you telling me this now? Ezekiel opened the leather pouch and pulled out dried herbs Jacob had never seen before. Some were twisted roots that looked like tiny hands. Others were leaves so dark they seemed to absorb light. The smell that rose from the pouch was earthy and wild, like the forest floor after rain mixed with something sharper, more dangerous. Because what I'm about to do isn't medicine the way white doctors practice it. This is older, deeper, and it requires something from you too. Ezekiel's pale eyes locked onto Jacob's. Your wife is walking the line between this world and the spirit world. To bring her back, we need to call on powers that demand payment. What kind of payment? Jacob's voice barely rose above a whisper. Trust. Complete trust. When I tell you to do something, you do it without question. When I tell you to be silent, you don't speak even if what you see scares you. And when the spirits come, because they will come, you don't run no matter how badly you want to. Another contraction seized Alaz, but this time she barely made a sound. Her body was shutting down, conserving what little energy remained. Jacob could see the life leaving her eyes, could feel the terrible cold that comes before death seeping into the wagon. He had seconds to decide, not minutes. Tell me what to do. Ezekiel nodded and began crushing the herbs between his palms. The smell grew stronger, wilder, until it seemed to fill not just the wagon but Jacob's mind as well. First, we need to stop the bleeding long enough to turn the baby. White Dove taught me a technique that most Cherokee midwives were afraid to try. It requires going deep inside, deeper than any doctor would dare. And if it doesn't work, then your wife dies knowing someone fought for her until the very end. But Jacob, Ezekiel paused, his hands still working the herbs. If it does work, if we manage to call her back from the edge, she's going to remember this night for the rest of her life. She's going to remember the pain, the fear, and the moment when death came calling. You sure you want to put her through that? Jacob looked at Alaz's face, so pale it seemed translucent in the flickering light. Her lips were turning blue, and he could count several seconds between each breath. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She's the strongest person I know. If anyone can survive this, it's her. Then we begin. Ezekiel sprinkled the crushed herbs into a small tin cup and added whiskey from Jacob's bottle. The mixture hissed and steamed as if it were alive. White Dove used to say that birth and death are just different doors in the same house. Tonight, we're going to make sure your wife chooses the right door to walk through. The mountain man lifted the cup to his lips and drank half the mixture in one swallow. His eyes rolled back for a moment, and when they focused again, they seemed to glow with their own light. Then he pressed the cup to Alaz's lips and tilted it gently, letting the remaining liquid flow into her mouth. Now we wait for the spirits to decide if they want to help us or take her home. The change in Alaz began almost immediately. Her breathing deepened, and color started returning to her cheeks like sunrise creeping across snow. But something else was happening too. Something that made the hair on Jacob's arm stand up. The air inside the wagon grew thick and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the wind outside changed pitch, becoming almost musical. The spirits are listening, Ezekiel whispered, his hands now glowing with a faint warmth as he placed them on Alaz's swollen belly. White Dove, if you can hear me, your grandson needs your help. This young mother needs your wisdom. Jacob watched in amazement as the bleeding began to slow. Not stop, but definitely slow, as if invisible hands were somehow sealing the wounds from the inside. Ezekiel's eyes had changed too, becoming distant and unfocused, like he was seeing things that existed in another world entirely. Tell me about your grandmother, Jacob said softly, desperate to keep some connection to the normal world as supernatural forces swirled around them. How did she learn all this? Ezekiel's hands moved in slow circles over Alaz's belly, following patterns that seemed to come from deep memory. White Dove was born during the worst winter in Cherokee history. 1794. Her mother died, bringing her into the world, just like this. The tribal midwife said she was cursed, that any baby born in so much blood would bring nothing but death. The mountain man's voice took on a rhythmic quality, like he was chanting an ancient song. But White Dove's grandmother refused to believe it. She was the tribe's medicine woman, keeper of the old knowledge. She took that blood-covered baby and raised her to be a healer instead of a curse. Taught her that the spirits who guard birth and death don't choose randomly. They test people. They see who's strong enough to hold the power of life and death in their hands. Alazan stirred, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in an hour. They were glassy and unfocused, but she was conscious. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. Ezekiel leaned closer to hear. She says she can see an old woman, he told Jacob. Cherokee woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Says the woman is telling her to fight, that her baby needs her to fight. Jacob's heart nearly stopped. How can she see that? How is any of this possible? The herbs open doorways in the mind. Let people see the spirits that are always around us, always watching. White Dove taught me that birth is the most sacred moment in any person's life. It's when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when the spirit guides can reach through and help if they choose to. Ezekiel's hands found the baby's position inside Alazan's womb. His face grew intense with concentration as he began to gently manipulate, trying to turn the child into the right position for birth. White Dove delivered over 300 babies in her lifetime. Never lost a mother. Never lost a child. The other Cherokee women said she had made a bargain with the death spirits, convinced them to spare the women and babies under her care. What happened to her? Jacob asked, watching his wife's face as Ezekiel worked. Alazan's expression was peaceful now, almost dreamy, as if the pain had lifted away. She died saving my wife and son. The words came out flat and emotionless, but Jacob could hear the ocean of pain underneath them. 15 years ago, right here in these mountains, Sarah went into labor early, just like your last. I tried to use everything White Dove had taught me, but I was young and scared and my hands shook too much. Ezekiel's hands stilled for a moment, and his eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. White Dove came through a blizzard worse than this one. Traveled for 2 days through snow that was over her head in places. Found us in a cabin not 10 miles from here. She worked on Sarah for 6 hours, used every technique she knew, called on every spirit guide she had ever contacted. But she saved them, right? Jacob's voice was desperate, needing this story to have a happy ending. She saved Sarah long enough for her to hold our son. Long enough to name him. Long enough to tell me she loved me one last time. Then the bleeding started again, and this time nothing could stop it. White Dove held my wife's hand while she died, then held my baby boy while he took his last breath an hour later. The wagon fell silent except for the wind outside and Alazan's steady breathing. Jacob felt tears running down his cheeks as he understood the depth of sacrifice this stranger was making. That's why you live alone up here. White Dove died that night too. The effort of trying to save them took everything she had left. Her heart just stopped beating while she sat beside their bodies. I buried all 3 of them in the spring when the ground thawed. Ezekiel's hands resumed their gentle work. Been carrying their ghosts ever since. Until tonight. Suddenly, Alazan gasped and her back arched. But this time it wasn't pain. It was relief. The baby had turned. Ezekiel's eyes brightened with hope for the first time since he'd entered their wagon. White Dove's still helping. She's guiding this baby home. The transformation inside the wagon was immediate and otherworldly. As soon as the baby turned into position, the very air seemed to shimmer with golden light that had no source Jacob could identify. Alazan's eyes opened fully for the first time in hours, and they were bright and alert, as if she had awakened from a long sleep rather than nearly dying from blood loss. I can feel her, Alazan whispered, her voice stronger than it had been all day. The Cherokee woman. She's holding my hand, telling me everything will be all right. She looked at Ezekiel with wonder. She says you're her favorite grandson, and that she's been waiting a long time to help you heal. Ezekiel's weathered face cracked into the first smile Jacob had seen from him. She always did like to have the last word. His hands continued their gentle work, but now his movements had a confidence that hadn't been there before. White Dove is guiding us both now. She's showing me exactly what to do. The bleeding had slowed to almost nothing, and Alazan's color was returning rapidly. But more than that, she seemed to be glowing from within, as if some internal light had been switched on. Her grip on Jacob's hand was strong and steady, and when she looked at him, her eyes held a peace he had never seen before. "Jacob, I need to tell you something while I can still speak clearly." Alazin's voice carried an urgency that made both men listen carefully. "When the pain was at its worst, when I thought I was dying, I went somewhere else. Somewhere beautiful and warm where there was no fear." "Where did you go?" Jacob leaned closer, stroking her hair gently. "I was in a meadow filled with wildflowers. The sun was warm on my face, and there was a woman sitting beside me on a blanket. She had long silver hair and the kindest eyes I've ever seen. She told me her name was White Dove and that she had been waiting to meet me." Ezekiel's hands trembled slightly as he prepared for the next phase of the delivery. "What did she tell you?" "She said that some babies choose their mothers very carefully. That our daughter picked me specifically because she knew I would need her strength to survive what was coming. She said the bleeding wasn't a punishment or a curse. It was a test to see if we were strong enough to accept the gift we were being given." Another contraction came, but this time Alaz wrote it with confidence instead of fear. She breathed deeply and steadily, her body working with the natural rhythm instead of fighting against it. "White Dove showed me how to let go of the fear. She said fear makes the body fight itself, but trust allows miracles to happen." Jacob watched his wife transform before his eyes. The pale, frightened woman who had been dying an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone radiant and powerful. It was as if the spirit of White Dove had awakened something deep inside Alaz, some ancient knowledge that all women carried but few ever accessed. "She's coming," Alaz announced, her voice filled with joy instead of pain. "I can feel her moving down. She's ready to meet us." Ezekiel positioned himself to catch the baby, his face a mixture of concentration and wonder. White Dove always said that birth was like catching lightning in your hands. You have to be ready, but you also have to trust that the lightning knows where it wants to go. The final contractions came in a rush, each one bringing the baby closer to the world. But instead of the agonizing pain that had marked the earlier stages of labor, these felt powerful and purposeful. Alazin's body knew exactly what to do, guided by wisdom that stretched back through generations of Cherokee mothers. "I can see the head," Ezekiel called out, his voice thick with emotion. "She's got dark hair, lots of it, and she's pink and healthy looking." Jacob felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter being born. This morning, he had been a frightened young man facing the possibility of losing everything he loved. Now he was witnessing the most incredible miracle he could imagine, guided by a mountain man who carried the spirits of his ancestors in his healing hands. "One more push, Alaz. Let White Dove help you bring her home." With a final surge of strength that seemed to come from the earth itself, Alaz brought their daughter into the world. The baby's first cry rang out clear and strong, echoing through the wagon and somehow harmonizing with the wind outside. It was the sound of new life announcing itself to the universe, demanding its place in the story that was just beginning. Ezekiel caught the baby with hands that had delivered death too many times, but now cradled life with infinite gentleness. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears running into his beard. "Absolutely perfect." As he placed the baby on Alazin's chest, the golden light in the wagon seemed to pulse once more, then fade back to normal lamplight. But the peace remained, settling over the small family like a blessing that would last a lifetime. The baby's cries filled the wagon with the most beautiful sound Jacob had ever heard. But something extraordinary was happening that went beyond the normal joy of birth. As Alaz held their daughter against her chest, both mother and child began to glow with the same warm golden light that had appeared earlier. The baby's tiny fist opened and closed as if she was grasping for something invisible, and her dark eyes seemed far too aware for a newborn. "She can see her," Alaz whispered in amazement, watching her daughter's gaze track movement that wasn't there. "White Dove is still here, and the baby can see her." Ezekiel knelt beside them, his massive frame somehow gentle as he checked both mother and child. Cherokee babies are born with the sight. Most lose it as they grow older, but for the first few days, they can see all the spirits that surround us. Your daughter is looking at her great-grandmother in spirit. The storm outside had begun to calm, as if the successful birth had somehow appeased the angry sky. Snow still fell, but the violent wind had died down to a whisper. Inside the wagon, warmth radiated from the little family in a way that had nothing to do with blankets or body heat. It was the warmth of souls touching across the boundary between life and death. "What's happening to me?" Alazna asked, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "I can feel things I've never felt before. It's like I can hear the mountain breathing, feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath us." Ezekiel smiled sadly. "White Dove opened a door in your spirit when she helped save your life. Some people who walk that close to death bring back gifts from the other side. You'll always be more sensitive to the spirit world now, more aware of the connections between all living things." Jacob watched his wife and daughter with tears in his eyes. The bleeding had stopped completely, and Alazna's color was better than it had been in weeks. But more than her physical recovery, there was something luminous about her now, as if she had been touched by starlight and still carried some of its glow. "Will it fade?" Jacob asked. "This connection she has now. It will change," Ezekiel said, finishing his careful examination of the baby. "But it will never completely go away." White Dove marked her, claimed her as family. Alazna will carry Cherokee wisdom in her heart for the rest of her life, whether she understands it or not. The baby had stopped crying and was now making soft cooing sounds as she nestled against her mother's skin. Her tiny fingers had found Alazna's long brown hair and were tangling in it with surprising strength. Every few seconds, her dark eyes would focus on something above her mother's shoulder, and she would smile the mysterious smile that newborns sometimes wear. "She's beautiful," Alazna breathed, studying every detail of her daughter's face. "Look at her eyes, Jacob. They're so old and wise, like she's lived before." Cherokee people believe that some souls choose to return to help their families through difficult times, Ezekiel explained, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one scarred finger. "This little one has the look of an old soul. She may have been waiting a long time for the right parents to choose." As if responding to his words, the baby turned her head toward Ezekiel and fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through him. For a moment, the mountain man's composure cracked, and raw emotion flickered across his weathered features. "What is it?" Alazna asked, noticing his reaction. "She has Sarah's eyes," Ezekiel whispered. "My wife's eyes. The same deep brown color. The same way of looking at you like she knows all your secrets." He paused, swallowing hard. White Dove always said that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to return to us. The wagon fell silent except for the baby's soft breathing and the gentle sound of snow hitting the canvas roof. Outside, the first hint of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky, though none of them had realized they had been awake all night. Time had seemed suspended during the long hours of labor and birth. "We need to name her," Jacob said softly, reaching out to touch his daughter's tiny hand. "She can't go unnamed after everything she's been through to get here." Alazna looked up at Ezekiel with eyes that now held depths they hadn't possessed before. What was White Dove's Cherokee name? Her real name, before the white settlers changed it. Ezekiel's eyes widened in surprise. "Onassa. It means my home." "Why do you ask?" "Because I want our daughter to carry that name. Onassa, Jacob's daughter. So she'll always remember the woman who saved her life and gave her mother the gift of sight." Alazna's voice carried a certainty that brooked no argument. "And so White Dove's spirit will always have a home in our family." The baby cooed softly as if approving of her new name, and for just a moment, the golden light returned, pulsing once around all four of them before fading back to the gray light of early morning. But something had been sealed in that moment, a bond that would connect them forever across the boundaries of blood and time. 3 days passed in the shelter of a shallow cave that Ezekiel led them to once the storm cleared. The mountain man had insisted that Alazna needed time to fully recover before they attempted to travel again, and Jacob was amazed at how quickly his wife's strength returned. But it wasn't just physical healing happening. Something deeper was taking root, changing all of them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Alazna sat by the small fire Ezekiel had built, nursing little Onassa while watching the mountain man work with herbs and roots he had gathered from the snow-covered forest. His movements were precise and reverent, like a priest performing sacred rituals. Every plant he touched seemed to respond to his presence, releasing fragrances that filled the cave with earthy peace. "Teach me," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the comfortable silence that had settled over them. Ezekiel looked up from the willow bark he was grinding into powder. "Teach you what?" "Everything. The herbs, the healing, the way you knew exactly what my body needed." Alazin's eyes held a determination that surprised both men. "White Dove opened something in me during the birth. I can feel it growing stronger every day. I need to understand what it means." Jacob shifted uncomfortably beside the fire. "Alazin, we're supposed to be traveling to Oregon. We have a farm waiting for us, a new life planned out." "Plans change," she replied, not taking her eyes off Ezekiel. "3 days ago, I nearly died bringing our daughter into this world. That changes everything. I can't go back to pretending that life is simple when I've seen how thin the wall between worlds really is." Ezekiel set down his work and studied her face carefully. "Cherokee medicine isn't something you learn from books or lectures. It requires sacrifice. It means accepting that you'll see death and suffering up close, that you'll carry the pain of everyone you try to help. Are you prepared for that?" "I've already carried the pain of almost losing my own child. I felt death reaching for me with cold fingers. If I can use what I learned from that experience to help other women, other babies, then maybe the suffering had a purpose." The baby stirred in her arms, making soft sounds that seemed almost like words. Alwenis's dark eyes were alert and curious, tracking the conversation between the adults as if she understood every word. Sometimes Jacob caught his daughter staring at empty spaces in the cave, smiling at things only she could see. "White Dove is still with her," Ezekiel observed, noticing Jacob's concerned expression. "Cherokee babies keep the sight longer when they're born during spiritual ceremonies. She'll probably see spirits until she's old enough to walk and talk." "Is that normal?" Jacob asked, gently stroking his daughter's soft hair. "Normal is different for children touched by the old medicine. She'll be stronger than other children, more aware of the connections between all living things. But she'll also carry responsibilities that most people never have to face." Ezekiel's voice grew serious. "Children with the sight become bridges between worlds. They help lost spirits find peace, guide healing energy to where it's needed most." Alazin looked down at her daughter with new understanding. "She'll be a healer too, won't she? If she chooses to be. The gift always comes with choice. White Dove could have used her abilities to harm instead of heal. She chose to serve life instead of death, to bring light instead of darkness. Your daughter will face the same choice when she's old enough to understand what she carries." The cave fell quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the soft sound of wind through the pine trees outside. Jacob felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. They had started this journey as simple farming people seeking land and opportunity. Now they were part of something ancient and powerful that he barely understood. "If Alazin learns your grandmother's medicine," Jacob said slowly, "what happens to our plans? Our farm in Oregon?" Ezekiel smiled, and for the first time since they'd met him, it reached his eyes completely. "Who says you can't have both? Oregon Territory is wild country, full of settlers who need healing knowledge. Towns spring up faster than doctors can reach them. A woman with Cherokee medicine skills would be worth her weight in gold out there. You really think I could learn enough to help people?" Alazin asked, hope and uncertainty warring in her voice. "White Dove chose you for a reason. She could have let you die and taken your spirit home with her. Instead, she fought to keep you here, in this world, with these gifts growing inside you. That tells me she sees something in you that even you don't know about yet." Ezekiel pulled a small leather bundle from his pack and held it out to Alaz. "These are the basic herbs every Cherokee midwife carries. Willow bark for pain, raspberry leaf for strengthening the womb, cohosh for helping babies come when they're ready. Learn these first, and I'll teach you the deeper mysteries later." Alazin accepted the bundle with trembling hands, feeling the weight of generations of healing knowledge passing into her care. "What about you? Will you come with us to Oregon? The mountain man was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if searching for answers in the dancing flames. I've been alone in these mountains for 15 years, carrying ghosts and old pain. Maybe it's time to see if I can learn to live among people again. Jacob felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. 3 days ago, they had been strangers thrown together by a storm. Now they felt like family, bound together by shared miracles and the promise of new beginnings. Then we go to Oregon together, he said firmly. All of us. And we'll build something better than a farm. We'll build a place where Cherokee wisdom and settler determination can grow side by side. Baby Onassa cooed softly as if agreeing with the plan, her tiny hand reaching toward the fire where the flames danced like spirits welcoming them home. The journey to Oregon took 6 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime of learning compressed into days. Ezekiel proved to be a patient teacher, showing Alazn how to identify healing plants even in their winter dormancy, how to read the signs of illness in a person's eyes and skin, how to listen to the subtle messages that bodies send when they're fighting for balance. With baby Onassa strapped to her chest, Alazn absorbed knowledge like desert earth soaks up rain. The most important lesson White Dove ever taught me, Ezekiel said as they made camp beside a frozen stream, is that healing isn't about fighting disease. It's about helping the body remember how to heal itself. Alazn nodded, grinding dried herbs between 2 stones while Onassa slept peacefully against her chest. The baby had grown stronger during their travels, but she still spent hours each day staring at invisible companions, sometimes reaching out tiny hands to touch things only she could see. How do you help someone remember something they never knew they knew? By listening to what their spirit is trying to tell you. Every person carries the wisdom of their ancestors in their blood, all the healing knowledge that kept their families alive for thousands of years. Sometimes that wisdom just needs someone to wake it up. Jacob listened to these conversations while tending their horses and managing the practical details of travel. He was beginning to understand that he had married a woman who was becoming something extraordinary, and their daughter was destined for a path he couldn't even imagine. Instead of feeling left out, he found himself growing proud of the strength and wisdom he saw developing in both of them. They reached the Willamette Valley just as the first signs of spring were beginning to show in the valley's protected lowlands. Rolling hills covered in oak and fir stretched as far as the eye could see, crossed by streams that ran clear and cold from the mountain snow. It was everything they had dreamed of when they left Missouri, and more. There, Jacob pointed to a gentle slope beside a creek that wound through a grove of ancient oak trees. That's where we'll build our home. But as they rode closer to investigate the land, they discovered they weren't the first to recognize its potential. Smoke rose from a small cabin tucked into the trees, and they could hear the sound of children playing beside the water. A woman emerged from the cabin as they approached, wiping her hands on a flour sack apron. "Travelers," she called out, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "You folks look like you've come a long way." "From Missouri," Jacob replied, dismounting and helping Alazn down from the wagon. "Name's Jacob. This is my wife Alazn and our daughter Onassa. And this is Ezekiel." The woman's eyes widened when she saw the mountain man. "Cherokee?" she asked, but not with fear or hostility. With hope. "Raised by Cherokee," Ezekiel corrected. "Learned their healing ways." "Why do you ask?" "Because my youngest has been sick for 2 weeks with fever that won't break. The nearest doctor is a 3-day ride, and I don't think she can wait that long." The woman's voice cracked with exhaustion and worry. "I'm Margaret. My husband Tom is out checking traps, but he'll be back before dark." Alazn stepped forward, feeling the familiar stirring in her chest that had become her guide to moments when healing was needed. "Can we see her?" Margaret led them into the one-room cabin where a little girl of perhaps 4 years lay on a narrow bed, her face flushed with fever and her breathing shallow and rapid. Alazn knelt beside the bed and gently placed her hand on the child's forehead, immediately feeling the heat and sensing something deeper. Something wrong in the child's energy that went beyond simple fever. "How long has she been like this?" Ezekiel asked, kneeling on the other side of the bed. "Started as a cold, then got worse. The fever came 3 days ago, and it keeps climbing no matter what I do. I've tried willow bark tea, cool cloths, even put her in the creek for a few minutes to bring the temperature down. Ezekiel and Alazn exchanged glances. They both sensed the same thing, a darkness in the child's spirit that spoke of something more serious than ordinary illness. Has she been having dreams? Alazn asked quietly. Bad dreams that make her cry out in her sleep? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. How did you know? She keeps talking about a dark man who wants to take her away. Says he stands at the foot of her bed every night, reaching for her with cold hands. Spirit sickness, Ezekiel murmured. Something's calling to her from the other side, trying to convince her to leave this world behind. Her body is fighting it with fever, but she's losing the battle. Jacob felt ice form in his stomach. Can you help her? Alazn looked down at little Aunt Asa, who had been sleeping peacefully in her arms but was now awake and staring intently at the sick child. The baby's dark eyes were tracking movement that the adults couldn't see, and she was making soft cooing sounds as if she was trying to communicate with someone. Aunt Asa can see what's threatening her, Alazn realized. She can see the spirit that's trying to take this little girl away. Ezekiel's face grew grim. Then we need to work fast. Spirit sickness doesn't wait for convenient timing. If we don't break the connection tonight, the fever will take her by morning. Margaret grabbed Alazn's arm. Please. She's all I have left. Her two brothers died last winter from scarlet fever. If I lose her too, you won't lose her, Alazn said with a confidence that surprised even herself. White Dove didn't guide us here by accident. She knew this child would need our help. As if responding to her mother's words, baby Aunt Asa reached out one tiny hand toward the sick girl and smiled the mysterious smile that meant she was seeing spirits. The fever-bright eyes of the older child focused on the baby with sudden clarity, and for just a moment, both children seemed to be looking at the same invisible presence. The healing begins now, Ezekiel said, already reaching for his medicine bundle. And this time, we have two spirit guides to help us fight for her life. The battle for the little girl's soul began at sunset. Ezekiel prepared a circle of protection around her bed using salt, sage, and stones he had carried from the sacred mountains of his childhood. Alazn positioned herself at the child's head, holding Aunt Asa so the baby could maintain visual contact with whatever spirits were gathering in the small cabin. Margaret sat in the corner, clutching her husband Tom's hand as he returned just in time to witness something beyond his understanding. What's her name? Alazn asked, gently stroking the fevered child's forehead. Lucy, Margaret whispered. Lucy May. Lucy, Alazn said softly, leaning close to the girl's ear. My name is Alazn, and this is my baby Aunt Asa. She can see the man who's been visiting you, and she wants you to know that you don't have to go with him. The child's eyes fluttered open, bright with fever, but suddenly alert. The dark man says I have to come. Says my brothers are waiting for me in the cold place. Ezekiel's hands moved in complex patterns over Lucy's body, pulling something invisible away from her chest and casting it toward the cabin door. That's not your brothers calling you, little one. That's something else wearing their faces, trying to trick you into leaving before your time. Aunt Asa began making urgent cooing sounds, her tiny fists waving at something above Lucy's bed. The baby's eyes tracked movement from left to right, following what appeared to be a struggle taking place in dimensions the adults could barely sense. But Lucy could see it clearly, and her breathing began to calm as she watched. There's a lady with silver hair, Lucy said with wonder. She's fighting the dark man, pushing him away from me. She says her name is White Dove and that she's Alwynnis's great-grandmother. Tears streamed down Alazn's face as she felt the familiar presence of the Cherokee spirit filling the cabin with protective warmth. White Dove is here to make sure you stay safe. She won't let anyone take you before you're ready to go. The temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly, and frost began forming on the windows despite the fire crackling in the hearth. Tom reached for his rifle, but Ezekiel stopped him with a sharp gesture. Don't interfere. This battle isn't being fought with weapons we can see. Lucy's fever spiked higher, her small body shaking with chills that had nothing to do with cold air. But instead of the weak moaning that had characterized her illness for days, She began speaking in a clear, strong voice that didn't sound entirely her own. You cannot have this child. She belongs to the world of the living, and her work here is not finished. The words came from Lucy's mouth, but they carried the authority and wisdom of someone far older. Return to the shadows where you belong. Onassa suddenly stopped cooing and began crying. Not the normal fussing of a baby, but sharp, urgent wails that seemed to cut through the supernatural tension like a knife. Her cries grew louder and more insistent until they filled the cabin with sound that was both heartbreaking and somehow triumphant. She's calling for help, Alazan realized. She's calling other spirits to come fight beside White Dove. The air in the cabin began to shimmer and pulse with the same golden light that had appeared during Alwynnis's birth. But this time the light was brighter, more intense, as if multiple sources of spiritual energy were converging on the small room. Margaret gasped as she saw shapes moving within the light, translucent figures that seemed to be surrounding Lucy's bed with protective presence. The ancestors are answering, Ezekiel said with reverence. Cherokee spirits, but also others. Settlers who died protecting their families, native warriors who gave their lives defending their children. They're all here because a baby called them to save an innocent life. Lucy's fever began to break dramatically, sweat pouring from her small body as her temperature plummeted back toward normal. Her breathing deepened and steadied, and color began returning to her pale cheeks. But more importantly, the terror that had haunted her eyes for days was completely gone, replaced by peaceful calm. The dark man is leaving, Lucy announced, her voice once again that of a 4-year-old child. He's going back to the cold place alone. White Dove is making sure he can't find me again. The golden light began to fade, but not before Onassa stopped crying and smiled her mysterious baby smile one last time. She reached out toward Lucy with one tiny hand, and when the older child took her finger, both girls seemed to glow for just a moment before the supernatural energy dissipated completely. It's over, Ezekiel said, slumping with exhaustion. The connection is broken. She'll recover fully now. Margaret rushed to her daughter's bedside, feeling Lucy's forehead and finding it cool and normal for the first time in days. How is this possible? How did you do this? We didn't do it alone, Alazan said, holding Onassa close as the baby settled into peaceful sleep. We had help from spirits who understand that some battles are too important to fight without allies. Tom stared at them all with an expression caught between gratitude and bewilderment. I don't understand what just happened, but I know you saved our daughter's life. How can we ever repay you? Jacob stepped forward, his face lit with sudden inspiration. Actually, there might be a way. We're looking for land to settle, somewhere we can build a home and help other families who need healing. This valley seems like it could use people with those kinds of skills. The land next to ours is unclaimed, Tom said immediately. Good soil, plenty of water, close enough that we could help each other when times get hard. If you're willing to be neighbors with folks who just witnessed something we'll probably never fully understand. Ezekiel looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of people who had just become family through shared miracles and mutual trust. For the first time in 15 years, he felt like he might be ready to belong somewhere again. I think White Dove would approve, he said quietly. I think she'd want us to build something lasting here, something that honors the old wisdom while embracing new possibilities. As if in agreement, little Lucy sat up in bed and smiled at all of them, her eyes bright and clear and fully alive. Outside, the Oregon spring whispered promises of new growth, new chances, and healing that would ripple out from this small cabin to touch countless lives in the years to come. 20 years later, the small settlement that grew around their homestead had become known throughout Oregon Territory as a place where miracles happened daily. Alazan's reputation as a healer had spread from family to family, carried by grateful mothers whose babies she had delivered safely and settlers whose fevers she had broken with Cherokee medicine. But she was no longer the frightened young woman who had nearly died in a wagon during a blizzard. She had become something new, something powerful. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the clinic she and Jacob had built beside their farmhouse, illuminating shelves lined with carefully labeled herbs and remedies. Alazan moved through the familiar space with the confidence of someone who had saved hundreds of lives, her graying hair braided with small bones and feathers in the Cherokee tradition that Ezekiel had taught her to honor. "Mama, Mrs. Henderson is here with her twins," called a voice from the doorway. Onassa stood there, now 20 years old and beautiful in a way that seemed to combine the best of two worlds. Her Cherokee heritage showed in her dark eyes and strong features, but her settler upbringing had given her a confidence and independence that made her formidable. "How are they presenting?" Alazan asked, already reaching for her medicine bundle. "Breech, both of them. She's been in labor since yesterday evening." Alwenis's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had assisted in births since she was old enough to hold instruments steady. "I can see 3 spirits around her. White Dove is there, and 2 others I don't recognize." The ability to see spirits had never left Onassa. If anything, it had grown stronger as she matured, making her invaluable as a healer's assistant. She could spot spiritual disturbances that threatened births, identify when someone was being called to cross over before their time, and communicate with ancestor spirits who offered guidance during difficult cases. "Tell Mrs. Henderson we'll be right there," Alazan said, gathering supplies. "And ask your father to fetch Ezekiel from the workshop." The years had been kind to their unusual family. Jacob had built a prosperous farm that fed half the county, while also serving as the practical anchor that kept the healers grounded in the everyday world. Ezekiel had emerged from his long isolation to become the valley's most respected craftsman, building furniture and tools with hands that seemed to imbue everything they touched with extra strength and longevity. But it was the healing work that had truly transformed their corner of Oregon. Word had spread throughout the territory about the settlement where Cherokee medicine and frontier determination combined to save lives that other doctors had given up on. Families traveled for hundreds of miles to bring sick children to Alazan. Pregnant women made pilgrimages to ensure safe births, and other healers came to learn from the woman who could call on ancestor spirits for guidance. As they walked to the Henderson cabin, Onassa fell into step beside her mother. "Mama, I've been having dreams again. About traveling east, back toward the mountains where I was born." Alazan nodded. She had been expecting this conversation for months. "White Dove has been visiting your dreams too, hasn't she? Telling you it's time to carry the medicine to new places." "How did you know?" "Because I had the same dreams when I was your age. The spirits don't want healing knowledge to stay in one place. They want it to spread, to find every mother and child who needs it." Alazan smiled at her daughter. "I think it's time for you to start your own journey." They found Mrs. Henderson in the final stages of an exhausting labor, surrounded by worried family members who had never dealt with twin births. But as soon as Alazan and Onassa entered the cabin, a calm settled over everyone present. They had learned to trust in the healing that seemed to flow through these women like water through a mountain stream. "The babies are ready," Onassa announced after a quick examination. "They were just waiting for us to arrive. White Dove says they're both strong and healthy, but they need to come quickly now." Working together with the seamless coordination they had developed over years of shared healings, mother and daughter guided Mrs. Henderson through the birth of 2 perfect baby boys. The delivery that had seemed impossible an hour earlier flowed as naturally as sunrise, leaving everyone in the cabin marveling at how simple it had appeared. "How do you do it?" Mrs. Henderson asked as she held her sons. "How do you make the impossible look easy?" "We remember that birth is the most natural thing in the world," Alazan replied, cleaning her hands in a basin of warm water. "We just help mothers remember what their bodies already know how to do." As they walked home in the golden light of evening, Onassa suddenly stopped and pointed toward the mountains that rose in purple majesty to the east. "She's there. White Dove. She's calling me home to the sacred places, telling me there are people in the mountains who need what we've learned here." Alazan followed her daughter's gaze and felt the familiar stirring of spiritual guidance. "Then you must go. Take everything I've taught you, everything Ezekiel has shown you about the old ways, and plant new seeds of healing wherever the spirits guide you." "What about you? What about the work here?" "The work here will continue. Other healers will come, drawn by the same forces that brought us to this valley. But you carry something special, something that can only be shared by traveling to places where no one has heard of Cherokee medicine or spirit healing. Alazan put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. You carry the future of the old knowledge, the bridge between ancient wisdom and the changing world. That night, as Anassa packed her few belongings and prepared for a journey that would take her back toward the Colorado mountains where her life had begun, the entire settlement gathered to say goodbye. Children she had helped deliver, mothers whose lives she had saved, families whose ancestors had been healed by her spirit sight, all came to offer blessings for her travels. Ezekiel presented her with a medicine bundle that contained herbs from every sacred place he had ever visited, along with tools carved from wood that had been blessed by Cherokee elders. Jacob gave her a horse bred from the strongest stock in the territory, capable of carrying her safely through any terrain. And Alazan placed around her daughter's neck a necklace of stones and shells that White Dove herself had blessed during one of her spirit visits. Remember, Alazan said as Anassa mounted her horse in the pre-dawn darkness, healing isn't about fighting death. It's about helping life remember how to flourish. Carry that knowledge wherever you go, and trust the spirits to guide you to the people who need it most. As her daughter rode away into the sunrise, disappearing into the forest that would carry her toward new adventures and unknown destinies, Alazan felt the deep satisfaction of a teacher whose student had surpassed her in wisdom and courage. The healing would continue, generation after generation, carried by young women who understood that some gifts are too precious to keep in one place. Behind her, Jacob and Ezekiel stood watching until the last glimpse of horse and rider vanished into the trees. Then they turned back toward their home, their clinic, their community of families whose lives had been touched by miracles that started with a desperate birth in a blizzard and grew into a legacy that would heal the world. One mother and child at a time. The circle was complete, but the story would never end. Somewhere in the mountains, White Dove smiled and prepared to guide a new generation of healers toward the people who needed them most. And in the growing towns and settlements throughout the West, mothers in difficult labor would find themselves visited by young women who carried ancient wisdom in their hands and the light of Cherokee ancestors in their eyes, ensuring that no woman would ever have to face the darkness of birth and death alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of courage, healing, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all across time and space. Every day, we share tales of ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when they needed it most. Don't miss a single story that could change the way you see the world.